standing by the 6th class, believe it or not. Thank God. I really enjoyed this course so far. I think that I've learned a lot even just preparing it. It's very, very enjoyable to bring everything together, be able to have a full picture. I think that I really enjoyed it, and I hope that you guys did as well. And tonight we're coming to complete the idea. Tonight we're going to come much more with the rational, with the logical way of explaining. Until now, we've spoken mostly about the what. What is the oral Torah? How exactly does it work? We discussed in each of the lessons how each part of the oral Torah functions, what it's really all about. Tonight we're going to move on from that. Tonight we're moving on to the 6th lesson, which is really going to challenge the whole thing. And this is really a good preparation for the giving of the Torah, as that's what we're going to be discussing the entire time. Tonight we're going to discuss the very aspect of the giving of the Torah, like we'll introduce in a minute. This is a beautiful prepreparation for the holiday of Shavuot. As we're all aware, tomorrow night already begins the holiday of Shavuot. And on Wednesday, we read the 10 Commandments. On Wednesday, the Torah reading discusses the entire idea of the giving of the Torah. And it's a very, very important thing to be able to come here, read in the synagogue, to read, to hear the story of the giving of the Torah, to understand its importance. Yes?
I have never celebrated Shavuot before, so the holiday is about...
It's the day that God gave us the Torah. The entire story of the giving of the Torah on Sinai happened on the 6th day of Sivan, which is tomorrow night, on Wednesday. You know, in Judaism, it starts the night before every holiday. So Tuesday night and Wednesday is the day that God gave us the Torah. It's a very, very special day. And in the synagogue, therefore, on Wednesday, we're going to read about the giving of the Torah. It's very important, if possible, to come by. We're going to read it over here at around 11 a.m. If you're able to come to hear the reading of the 10 Commandments, as we're going to hear the exact story like we're going to read tonight. Tonight's part of our reading is going to be what we're going to read together on Wednesday in the synagogue. So if you're able to come by on Wednesday, it's very, very important to hear the 10 Commandments. Yes?
Will there be segregated men and women on that day?
During the Torah reading and the services, yes. Afterwards, we have a kiddush where everybody can hang out together. We have a nice dairy lunch on.
I'm sorry, I'm asking these questions because I totally do not know. So you have the reading of the Torah twice, one for the men and one for the women?
No. It's one synagogue, and even the woman's side can hear everything that's going on at the same time. They're still in the same room. It's the same area. You can look inside for the way it's set up. It's set up the same as it always is. During the actual services, there's a split. The men on one side, the women on the other side. But everyone's hearing the same thing and participating in the same service at the same time. I don't want to go into more details now because this is not really, it's going to take too long to get into. But that is the general structure of our synagogue, and I hope that you can come experience it, even just for a few minutes to stop in for the Torah reading. Even just 11 to 11:30 on Wednesday, it's very, very important. Okay.
Amanda, one question relating to this. Was it the 3rd month of Sivan the Torah was given?
Yes.
Then you said it was the 6th month.
Okay.
I'm
So now,
confused.
no problem. Okay, so now, firstly, before we begin the actual lesson, okay, what a sheep. Okay, before we begin, I just want to mention that this class and this series has been sponsored in the memory of Esther Elka Bas Aharon. May her neshama have an aliyah, bring down tremendous blessings for the entire Howard family, for all of the Jewish people, should protect us. We already know this course is also in honor of those in Israel. Baruch Hashem, we heard good news on Shabbat, and God should continue only sending good news, only revealed miracles, should have all the hostages return home safely, and an end to the suffering over there with only good peace and only good times. And a big thank you to the Howard family for sponsoring and for allowing us. I think that we all enjoyed and gained a lot in our knowledge to have this course, and this should be a real merit in honor of her neshama and as protection for the entire family for only health, happiness, and good things to celebrate in the future. Okay, and with that, let's actually jump in. We are going to discuss the 6th and final lesson for this course. So, this lesson is going to be titled, The Truth of Sinai. Yeah, the truth, the idea of the giving of the Torah. To understand a little bit about it, right? Or in the Hebrew, Torah emet, natan lanu, which means that God gave us the Torah of truth, that the Torah is true, the giving of the Torah is true, and we're going to understand a little bit how that is, what it's all about, and try to prove it from a logical perspective. Like I mentioned earlier, other classes until now, we're more discussing the what. What is the oral Torah? What is each part of the oral Torah? Today we're going to really challenge the very basis of that. As we all have experienced, the whole thing that we've discussed until now was the aspect that the Torah has different parts because God gave it to Moses like that. God gave Moses the explanation on Sinai. God gave Moses the way to learn. God gave Moses the rules of how the rabbis can legislate things. God gave Moses the capability for customs to exist. So all the aspects of the oral Torah that we discussed until now is all based on the fact that the Torah was given on Sinai. And tonight we're going to come to question that very fact. Can we logically prove, not coming from a place of belief, but can we logically prove, using our mind, the fact that God gave Torah on Mount Sinai? Can we understand and prove it that this whole story, this whole narrative that we discussed until now actually occurred? Now, before we jump into that, though, let's first understand, right, before we understand the rational basis, which is what we're aiming to get, the rational understanding that the Torah was given on Sinai, we first have to understand why this might be important to everybody. So, firstly, before we begin, let's look at our textbooks. On page 305 in the Hebrew books, page 70, Amud Shivim, we're going to look at the first exercise over there, which is to understand before we begin, is this important? Is this something which is of value to us?
305 you said?
Page 305. 188, I'm sorry. 188.
Where did you come
My
up
bad.
with 305?
188 in the English book, 70 in the Hebrew book.
The truth of Sinai.
Okay. So, we see over there learning exercise 1. And the question that I want to hear from you guys is, we are going to discuss, do you find it important to logically prove and establish that God revealed himself to our ancestors at Sinai, and what is your reason?
Yes.
Yeah? Do you guys think that it's important? I want to see from you guys, let me hear a little bit. Do we think that A, it's very important, B, it's somewhat important, C, it's relatively unimportant, or D, it's completely unimportant? What do you guys think? I want to see by either fingers. You can show me 1, 2, 3, or 4, or you can call it out, whatever you prefer. If you think it's very important, not, or somewhat important, not so important, or totally not important. Okay? Okay?
Hey.
Very good.
One finger very.
One finger for very, yes. Okay, so I think that most of you said it's pretty important. Some of you are more on the side of it's not so important. But tonight we're going to understand really who it's important for. So in general, you could divide the people that this might not be so important for into 4 categories. Let's discuss who these 4 categories would be and understand why it's still important for them. So the first category of people that this might not be so relevant for is someone who calls himself an atheist. Someone who doesn't believe in the whole idea that God exists. So for him, we're not really going to be able to address so much tonight, because if you want to have a whole course on why God exists and how we could prove that, we could have a separate course for that. But today, before we come to understand that God exists and that God communicates with us, once we have that as a premise, then we can come to understand that the story of Sinai occurred. If you're not ready yet to jump in, to know the fact that God exists, then we're not yet ready to really discuss this today. Although, I do think that when we walk out today, once you understand that the Sinai narrative is probably true, then it may actually help you believe in God a little more as well. There were a few people throughout that I know, that I've heard of, that have actually came to understand that God's existence because they heard of the importance of the giving of the Torah and how it's logically true. But even before that, we're not really addressing this type of person. If you're not a believer, you don't believe in God's existence, then we're not really going to address those things tonight. The second person, who this might not feel so important for, or might not think this is ready, is someone who says that I'm not ready. Meaning, I think that it might be true, it might not be true, but practically, I don't want to start doing all the mitzvahs. If I know that God gave us the Torah, if I know that God commanded us to do all these things, and suddenly I find out that this whole thing is actually true, now suddenly I have to change over my whole kitchen and start keeping kosher and start keeping Shabbat, it sounds like a little bit much for me. So maybe I'd rather not know that this thing is so true, and we'll keep it as like an in theory thing, because I don't want to actually change my lifestyle. And to this person, I want to tell you that even though you may not be holding by flipping over your kitchen tomorrow, you may not be holding by starting to keep 100% Jewish lifestyle, this is still a very important thing to know. All of you are familiar with Hanukkah? Yeah? On Hanukkah, the first night of Hanukkah, how many candles do we light on our menorah?
9.
2.
Yeah? The leader light and one more light.
Well,
Right?
not 9 all the way.
There are 9 slots on our menorah. So let me ask you all, if we're going to light 8 candles, 9 candles by the end of Hanukkah, why don't we start right away? You need to have a full menorah. Why do we start with 1? Not just because that's the way God wants us to
Because
work.
there's only that many candles in the
So why don't we do 8 every night? Yeah? So the reason why is because God wants us to start slowly. We start with step number 1. Then we go to step number 2. To step number 3 the next day. We go step by step. And the same is true in serving God. We need to have a full menorah. You need to have 8 spaces on your candelabra. You need to know that this is true. We have to understand that God gave us the Torah. Now, we're not saying that tomorrow you need to change your lifestyle. But you can choose one thing that you want to grow in. Every candle that you add is adding light. Every truth that you add to your serving God is true. And therefore, even if you're not ready to jump in and say, I'm going to start serving God 100%, that's fine. You take it one step at a time, one candle at a time. This doesn't need to be something which is scary and intimidating. You'll take it at your pace. But to know that it's true and to understand logically of the giving of the Torah is a very important thing for us. And once we do that, you'll be able to slowly start working your way towards serving God a little bit more. Where it ends up, we'll figure out in 10 years. Hopefully, we'll all be holding in good places, healthy and happy at that time. Okay. That's the second person. Yeah.
I know you're going to not want to answer this question, but how do you explain Reform Judaism then? Because that doesn't, I mean, you don't follow every single thing. You know it exists, but you don't, you don't have to keep kosher and all that stuff.
I don't think that it really falls into this discussion right now. It's going to be more of a tangent. But in short, I think that there is more to work on. And I don't know what exactly the Reform rabbis preach or whatever it is, but the Torah that we got from God says all of these rules. And to say that some of them are not accurate is not a true thing. Okay, so then if it's accurate, then slowly we should work on doing more and more. They may say that we're going to adjust it, whatever the basis of it is, to make people at least do something. Okay, that's a start. They're having people at least light one candle. Maybe that's their approach. I don't know. Maybe they'll say light one candle. But the truth of the fact that God gave us the Torah, God expects us to do all 8 candles at the end, is the truth. Now, they may say that you're starting at 1, starting at 2. Okay, hopefully we'll grow from there. Okay. The next person that might feel that this is not so important for him is somebody who might claim to himself that I'm a major believer. I know that God gave the Torah. I don't need to prove it logically. Why are we going to get into discussions to understand, to prove, to try to use our mind? God said it. It's true. I believe. I accept. That's it. Why am I going to waste my time trying to spend the next hour and a half proving logically that God did it? I believe in God. I believe in the Torah. End of story. Don't hock me a Chinik, as they say. Don't give me stories about how we can prove it logically. I'm not interested. And the answer to that is, okay, it's very important to believe. But we know even by the giving of the Torah, that God said, we said, Na'aseh v'nishma. God said to the Jewish people, I'm going to give you the Torah. And the Jews said, we're going to do, and we're going to listen. What's the 2 steps? Number 1 is do. Believe, understand. That's very important. But you can't stop at that. You need to have step number 2, which is nishma, to understand it. God doesn't want us to blindly follow what he says with blind faith. He wants us to use our mind. He didn't create our body with just limbs without a brain. He created us to have a brain because he wants us to use it to serve him as well. To understand, to logically relate to the ideas of the giving of the Torah as well. So even if you want to be a blind believer, it's a beautiful quality, but you're also supposed to use your mind to understand it. And that's what we're going to aim to do tonight, is to logically understand the idea of the giving of the Torah and its truth. Okay, and the 4th category of people who might feel like this is not really for them yet is somebody who calls themselves a beauty seeker. Interesting name, I don't know why they chose that, but what we mean by that is somebody who says Torah is about feeling good, the family life, Shabbat is about spending time with the family, it's just about the meaningful, the beautiful experiences. That's what Torah is really about. To start telling me that God appeared at Mount Sinai on all these stories, that's not really for me. I'm looking just for the beautiful, fluffy aspects, the nice aspects, the enjoyable parts. And the problem with that, obviously, is that that's beautiful that you keep Torah mitzvahs just because it's beautiful to you. What happens when you find a law which you don't find so beautiful? And what happens if one day your children might see that you're doing it just because it's beautiful, but they don't see that you understand anything and you don't actually appreciate it? It might not last so long. So it's important to also understand it logically, to actually relate to the ideas and not just pick and choose. Yeah, it's not a menu where you choose the mitzvahs that you find beautiful and the rest of them we say goodbye to. Right, we do the mitzvahs because God commanded us to, and we're going to see tonight a little bit more about this idea that God commanded us to, and it's not just to pick and choose what we find beautiful. Okay, so that's a little bit of introduction, not necessarily so relevant to what we're just going to discuss soon, but it's more important that we should recognize how important this idea is. No matter where you're holding, so to say, in your Judaism, no matter whether you find yourself at the top and you're just a believer who wants to follow blindly, or whether you're somebody who's not yet ready to even start doing any mitzvahs, that's fine. This discussion is still important to you. Still important that we understand the fact that God gave us the Torah. What we're going to do with the knowledge we'll figure out after. But it's important to firstly establish the facts that we're going to lay on the ground tonight, to appreciate the fact that God gave us the Torah, to prove it logically, and from there to be able to appreciate the idea of the giving of the Torah on the holiday of Shavuot that we're about to experience. Okay, so now let's actually jump into this. Now that we have the fact that it's important to us, let's get ready to actually see what's going on. Any questions before we get started, get going?
Just a comment, you know that the Hebrew is not working.
I did see that. I'm not sure why.
Okay. Just let you know.
The computer died?
It's okay,
So
it's
that's why.
okay.
Do you mind grabbing a...
It's okay, but awesome.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
You say
The wire's right there. If you can just grab an extender cord to plug it in. Okay. So, there's an extender cord in the kitchen sink. Okay. So now, we are going to jump into the actual discussion that we're going to have tonight. Tonight, as we said before, we're going to prove logically the idea of the giving of the Torah. Now, this is not something new that we're going to attempt to accomplish tonight. A lot of the things that we've discussed so far in this course has been from Rambam. Maimonides, from the 13th century. Rambam is somebody who's a very, very important figure. Maimonides, he codified the Jewish law in a revolutionary manner. And a lot of the quotes that we've been discussing until now have been from him. So tonight's lesson is only appropriate that we also start out with a quote from him, which is a very, very fascinating letter actually. This letter he originally wrote to the group of Jews who were going through a little bit of hard times. The Jews at the time in Yemen had three big challenges that came at the same time. Firstly, there was the groups of the Turks that were trying to wipe them out. The people who believed in Islam were trying to get everybody else to follow their ways, and they were willing to kill out many of the Jews who weren't so willing to follow their ways. And that was a big problem. At the same time of that, there was a Jew who was a little bit of a respected Jew who actually converted to Islam and started to follow their beliefs, and unfortunately some people were being drawn towards that lifestyle and they wanted to follow these Islam beliefs as well. So there was firstly pressure of your life, and secondly there was the challenges that were coming from following the other Jews who were going there. And lastly, it was at a point in time where there was a Jew who, I'm not going to go into this full story, but he claimed to be Mashiach, and it turned out it was false, and the Jews at the time were very broken-spirited. So the Jews at the time were kind of at it low. They were kind of empty, didn't really have a passion to serve God properly, and they had a lot of questions, a lot of good claims. So they wrote a letter to Rambam, help us out, figure it out. What are we supposed to do? And what Rambam responded was a very, very powerful letter, which I advise you all to read the full letter in full. But we're just going to quote one snippet over here, which is a letter which Rambam, which as we know, Rambam in general, Maimonides, was somebody who was a thinker. He wasn't somebody who just accepted. There are actually some people who didn't like him because of that. But everything that the Rambam wrote, he wrote books to understand logically the ideas of the Torah, to logically understand some mitzvahs, to logically relate to God. And in this letter that he wrote to them, he wrote a very, very powerful message. And let's read that together. So on page 188, we're going to look at text 1, or for page 70 in the Hebrew. Let's see together, page 188. Who wants to start us off? Don't be afraid. Go ahead. Michal, thank you.
Remember, my co-religionists, that this great, incomparable, and unique historical event is attested to by the best of evidence, for never before or since has a whole nation witnessed a revelation from God or beheld His splendor.
Thank you. So what Rambam is saying is that Torah is a Torah of truth. And he says in his words that this is something which can be proven logically. Right? What's his wording? It's a unique historical event with the best of evidence. Right? The Rambam is not just making up stories. He says it's the best of evidence that we can use to prove this. Something which you can use logically to understand that God gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai. Right? He's not coming with saying, believe it. He's writing a letter to these Jews who are having a hard time. He said, if you're not ready to believe, you have big questions, Islam looks very tempting, whether because they're putting a gun to your head or because it looks popular, understand a little bit more about your own religion first. Understand a little bit more about Judaism. And you'll see that the idea of the giving of the Torah, the fact that God gave us the Torah, is something which can be proved with the best of evidence. And the Rambam was a known doctor. He didn't just, wasn't a weak head, and he thought that it was something smart. He was a very, very intelligent man. And he told us that this is something we can prove logically. So that's what we're going to set out to do. We're going to understand why Rambam would claim that this is something which is logical, with the best of evidence, the fact that God gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai. How is it something logical? How is it something we can all relate to? And what led him to really write this in a very strong letter for Jews who are having a hard time, and they should accept this because it's the best of evidence, right? Or in their wording over here on page 189, right? The question is, what led Maimonides and others to the conclusion that the event at Sinai is attested to by the best of evidence. Yeah? Now, Rambam wasn't the only one, by the way, who believed in this. I'm sure a lot of us here, even if you didn't necessarily grow up so much following the ways of Torah and mitzvahs, I'm assuming that all of you had a great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother back in Russia, wherever your family comes from. Most of us here, unless you come from a recently converted family, most of us here have great-grandparents, Elta Bubbies, yeah, who would follow the ways of Torah and mitzvahs. And it wasn't only because they were stupid and they followed blindly. A lot of them were very, very sharp. A lot of them used their brains. And a lot of them had a lot of questions. The Jews are very good at asking questions. Yet they all followed blindly this narrative of the giving of the Torah. So tonight we're going to set out to understand why exactly did your Bubby believe in this whole idea of the Jews leaving Egypt and the Jews receiving the Torah. What was she really thinking and where does it all come from? Okay, so that's what we're going to come to establish tonight. Okay. So now, if we're setting out to do a pretty big thing over here, we want to set out to prove logically, we have to first establish what level of proof are we aiming to get. Yeah? There's different kinds of proof that you might have. There's different levels. Yeah? Any of you a lawyer over here?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So you'll know that in a court case, there's different kinds of proofs that might exist. The first one would be called, sorry, it's blocking, right? The first one is called any measure of evidence. Yeah? Maybe I should take down my other screen. Any measure of evidence means, yeah, that if somebody comes to a court and they have a little bit of a proof, but it sounds pretty weak, and they don't really have anything to back it up, and it doesn't really sound very accurate, but they said something that might sound true. Okay, that's one level of evidence, which oftentimes in a court case will be dismissed as hocus pocus. Yeah, a lot of our great claims that we have, what do they call conspiracy theories, have this idea, right, where you had a whole story that happened, there was one thing which didn't really line up, let's make a whole big deal out of that little thing and figure out a whole new conspiracy theory which has a little bit of evidence to support it, but not that much. Okay, the second level of proof that might exist is something which is called more likely true than false. What that means is, I can't really prove it. I can't say 100% that that happened, but it makes more sense to say that that happened than to say that it didn't happen. I'm more willing to agree with your version of the story than what another version might be. Okay, that's the second type of proof which might exist. The third type of proof which might exist is you say it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that there's a pretty good chance that that happened, right? There's a 99% chance that that happened. Might something crazy have occurred that would say otherwise? It's possible, but I would assume that that's what happened, right? This is usually what we aim for in a court case, yeah? If somebody shows up today in the American legal court system and they have a CCTV, yeah, you have your video, that you see a man walk into a room with a knife and, God forbid, stab another person, and he walks out with a bloody knife, and somebody sees him with a bloody knife, they show that to the court system, what would the court system say? He's guilty, right? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, could it be possible that the video was faked, and the whole story was faked, and his bloody knife was actually because he was cutting chicken? And it's possible, but it would be very, very difficult to prove such a thing. In today's American court, right, they accept cameras as a proof, especially if there's a witness over there as well that saw the bloody knife. It's beyond a reasonable doubt that that occurred. And then there's something called beyond the shadow of a doubt, that this is 100% accurate. And in today's world, it's not really possible to ever have that because you can always come up with some crazy conspiracy theory which doesn't really add up. Yeah? In general, we don't live our life with the idea of something which is beyond the shadow of a doubt. Yeah? All of you feel safe in here? Yeah? None of you came with a safety helmet? Can you know with beyond the shadow of a doubt that the roof won't cave in on you tonight? Maybe not. But none of us live our life in that type of way because it's not realistic to live your life that way.
Because
you know?
the vodka.
Yeah, absolute. That's right. Absolute. If you think enough, then maybe you can.
Impossible.
Yeah, there might. Ever heard of the brain in a vat theory? Yeah. All of you believe that you're alive and you came here today? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, there's actually a scientist who tried to claim that actually you never actually know if you're alive or not, because it's very possible that there was a scientist who 15 years ago took your brain out of your head, put it into a vat, hooked it up with wires, and made your brain think that it's going through all the experiences that it had. So your brain fully is programmed to believe that every occurrence that you've had in your last 15 years actually occurred, but really our brain is only a brain in a vat, and you don't actually know what's going on. And basically the point of the scientist is there's no way that you can prove otherwise. Because no matter what you try to prove it with, well, it's being wired that you won't believe that. It's being wired that you'll feel like you're a real person. So if you pinch yourself, you'll be wired to feel that pinch. So it doesn't actually mean anything. And you cannot prove this theory wrong, right? But then again, nobody actually will believe that because it's a little bit of a ridiculous statement, right? Nobody actually thinks that you're a brain in the vat. Could we prove it wrong? Maybe not. But that's something which is a little bit of a ridiculous claim in a certain sense, right? You can't say it's beyond the shadow of a doubt that we're alive here and we're not a brain in a vat, but it's definitely beyond a reasonable doubt, right? It would be a little bit unreasonable to claim otherwise. So that's the aim that we're going to go for tonight, right? We want it to be more than just a measure of evidence. And we're going to speak about the idea of the giving of the Torah. We're not just going to say that, oh, it might have been true, right? We want it to be in your brain at least more likely true than false. At least it's more likely to say that the story of the giving of the Torah happened, more likely than it not having happened. But even better, and this is going to be up to you guys, we want to be able to really get it beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a very, very good chance it's beyond a reasonable doubt to say that the story happened, right? It would be insufficient to walk out saying that there's any measure of evidence. I hope that we get more than that. But at the same time, I don't think that we're going to be able to walk out without beyond the shadow of a doubt, because you can always come up with some crazy illusion, theory, whatever it was. Right? But we're going to come with a reasonable understanding for the fact that we can say with confidence that God gave us the Torah by Mount Sinai. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Some things are beyond belief.
Correct, but that we're trying to say that this is something which is logical.
Yeah, but
This is not beyond belief.
beyond belief could be logical in a sense.
I'm not sure what you mean, but we are going to move on for now. Is that all right?
Okay.
Okay. So now, again, we are not going to be able to prove anything beyond the shadow of a doubt. That's not really possible. As just like you won't be able to prove to me that you guys are all here tonight, right? You might be a brain in a vat. But assuming that you're here tonight and you're willing to walk out and say with confidence that you came to this class tonight, I hope that we'll be able to walk out and say with confidence, with beyond a reasonable doubt, that God gave the Torah to the Jews at Mount Sinai. Okay. Now that we have our introductions, let's actually get involved. Yeah? Anybody have any questions before we jump in? Okay. So now let's go for it. We have on our page, on page 191, we have a bunch of texts over here, text 2a, b, and c. And I'm going to ask you guys,
191.
page 191, and ask you guys to do a little bit of reading. We're going to read together out loud these three texts, and then we're going to do an exercise with it. So, page 191, text 2a. Who would like to read it for us? Please, Marcy, go ahead and start us off.
In the third month of the children of Israel's departure from Egypt, on this day they arrived in the desert of Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim, and they arrived in the desert of Sinai, and they encamped in the desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. God said to Moses, "Behold, I will come to you in the thickness of the cloud, in order that the people hear when I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever." God said to Moses, "Go to the people and prepare them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments. They shall be prepared for the third day, for on the third day God will descend before the eyes of all the people upon Mount Sinai." It came to pass on the third day, when it was morning, that there were thunderclaps and lightning flashes, and a thick cloud was upon the mountain, and a very powerful blast of the shofar, and the entire nation that was in the camp shuddered. Moses brought the people out toward God from the camp, and they stood at the bottom of the mountain. God spoke all these words, saying, "I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." All the people saw the voices in the torches, the sound of the shofar, and the smoking mountain. The people saw and trembled, and they stood from afar. They said to Moses, "You speak with us, and we will hear. But let God not speak with us, lest we die." The people remained far off, and Moses drew near to the opaque darkness where God was. God said to Moses, "So shall you say to the children of Israel, you have seen that from the heavens I have spoken with you."
Thank you. Okay, so obviously we're not going to use the account, the narrative written in the Torah, as a proof that God gave us the Torah, because that would be kind of circular logic and wouldn't actually get us anywhere, right? What we're going to do right now is a little exercise just to be familiar with the story of the giving of the Torah. Once we're familiar with it, then we'll be able to actually understand it a little bit more so that we can prove its accuracy and that it occurred. All of you have now on your tables a pen. We're going to do this in 3 parts with each of these 3 texts. But let's go in this text 2a and underline any word or phrase that indicates that God revealed himself at Mount Sinai, not only to Moses or to a select few individuals, but rather a public display to all the Jewish people. Anytime that we mention the public, let's underline it in our text. Text 2a, underline any time that it seems to you that God was speaking to a large group and not just an individual.
Oh, large group.
Including voices and thunders and shofars and...
That's something that the Jewish people would have seen. So if you feel that, then go for it. You're not being graded on this.
Oh, no?
The grades are going to come after.
We're supposed to underline.
Underline any time that you see that this was a public occurrence and not just to Moses himself or to a few individuals themselves. By the way, this reading over here is that we just read is the beginning of the Torah reading that we're going to read on Wednesday that we mentioned. The giving of the Torah.
You're going to be the Balkora, I presume.
I presume so as well. Unless you want to do it, Simon.
I don't want to do it.
Okay. And I guess if I have no choice. If you're not going to do it, someone's got it.
Once.
Once? Okay. Let's move on to text 2b. If you're still finishing 2a, that's fine. We're going to read text 2b. And again, while we're reading it out loud, you guys can all underline any time that it seems like it's a public occurrence that God revealed himself at Mount Sinai. Again, this is not going to be from the book of Exodus. This is now going to be from the book of Deuteronomy. So when it's the book of Deuteronomy, different than the first 4 books of the Torah, is that Moses is the one who's speaking. It's coming from his perspective as opposed to from a narrator who is above the whole story talking. So whenever it says I, it's referring to Moses, but it's still the same story as it's recorded in the 5 books of the Torah in the book of Deuteronomy. So let's read together text 2b. Yeah. Okay, text 2b. Someone want to read it for us? Someone hasn't read yet? 2b? Go for it. Okay, and as we're reading it, underline any time that it sounds to you like this is a public occurrence, that God is revealing himself in front of many people. Text 2b.
But beware and watch yourself very well, lest you forget the things that your eyes saw, and lest these things depart from your heart all the days of your life. Be sure to make them known to your children and to your children's children. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when God said to me, assemble the people for me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to revere me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may reach their children. You approached and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire up to the midst of the heavens, with darkness, a cloud, and opaque darkness. God spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no image, just a voice. He told you his covenant, which he commanded you to do, the 10 commandments, and he inscribed them on 2 stone tablets. Did ever a people hear God's voice speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and live? You have been shown in order to know that the Lord is God, there is none else besides him. From the heavens he let you hear his voice to instruct you, and upon the earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire.
Thank you. So again, let's take a minute. Underline any time that it seems like the appearance was to all of the Jewish people and not just to Moses. Not just to Moshe. Underline any time that it seems to you that this was something which all the Jewish people had witnessed together. I'll give you a hint. Some of the answers are on the board.
I'm just listening.
Okay.
I don't want to mention it.
Okay, no problem. No, you don't need to. And now for text 2c, someone want to read it for us? Neil, you want to take it for us? If you'd like to.
You remembered my name, I'm very... Face to face, God spoke with you at the mountain out of the midst of the fire. God spoke these words to your entire assembly at the mountain, out of the midst of the fire. the cloud, and the opaque darkness, for the great voice which he did not cease. And he inscribed them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. When you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, and the mountain was burning with fire, you approached me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders. You said, Behold, God has shown us his glory and his greatness, and we heard his voice from the midst of the fire. We saw this day that God speaks with man, yet man remains alive.
Thank you. So, again, let's take 1 minute. Oh, sorry, if it continues when we talk to the next page, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we have some stuff here.
You're almost there. Almost done. Almost relieved.
So, now, why should we die? So now, for this great fire will consume us. We will die if we continue to hear the voice of God. For who is there of all flesh who heard the voice of the living God speaking from the midst of the fire as we have and live?
Thank you. Now you're good. Okay, so again, let's take a minute. Underline anytime that it seems to you like this is a public occurrence which occurred in front of many people, and not just to Moses and not just to a select few. How many times does it seem like this is to a large mass of people?
Yeah, it's something.
Every time.
Okay, so if you add up the numbers, it comes out to about 20 times or so. Yeah, how many times did you guys find? Approximately? Yeah? Give or take 20? Okay, so it seems pretty clear from the text at least. Obviously, this is not going to be the end of the story, because that would be pretty circular logic to bring the Torah as a proof. But just firstly to understand the narrative, at least the version that the Torah is trying to tell us, let's try to see what is this version, the story that they're trying to tell us. The story that they're trying to tell us is that this was a public narrative, something which occurred in front of many, many people. Now, how many people are we talking when we say many, many people? So let's just do a little bit of math. I don't want to scare anybody. Not such scary. Yeah, we have a math teacher here, right?
3 million.
You do math sometimes?
Yeah.
Okay. So, how many did you say? 3 million?
About 3 million.
Very good. Exactly. Approximately. So, the Torah tells us, the three text 3, yeah, text Shlishit, on bottom of page 73 in Hebrew, on top of 196 in English. Someone want to read this one-liner for us? Anybody? David? Go to your neighbor? All right.
Certainly. The children of Israel traveled from Ramses toward Sukkot, about 600,000 adult males on foot, beside the young children.
Thank you. So the Torah tells us that the group of people who came to the giving of the Torah was approximately 600,000 men between 20 to 60. So if we're saying that there's about 600,000 men between 20 and 60, there's also many people under 20. There are many people over 60. And this is only the men. So let's assume that there was an equal amount of men and women there, approximately. A lot of them may have been married. So let's say there was also about 600,000 women. And let's say that the average family had 3 kids. A lot of them had some more, some of them had some less, right? So let's say that there was approximately 1.8 million children, right? So we're going to say it's about 3 million. If it's 2 million, that's fine too. It's not, the number's not important. Yeah.
Didn't they say that a lot of children came with him? All the children that their parents died in Makat HaChoshech, the kids stayed alive. So it's not 3 per family. It was like 13 to 20.
So you're saying it's even more. Okay, even better. Even better. Yeah, so it's 4 or 5 million. Okay, very good. The number's not going to be the important part so much. Let it be 2 million if that's more comfortable to you. 3 million, whatever it is. For now, we're going to assume the number 3 million approximately, because that's what Mr. Mishkanian said. So there's approximately 3 million people that were there by the giving of the Torah. Right? Pretty large amount of people. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's get into this story a little bit more. Yeah? Before we get into the story, let's give a little bit of a joke. I feel like it's been too long. Speaking about the giving of the Torah. Yeah? The tablets. So there was a rabbi who came from Europe to come and visit America. So he's coming around to the schools to be able to see how is the Torah learning in America. So he comes to one of these Sunday schools. Yeah, if anyone remembers the Sunday Talmud Torahs. He comes in and he's there to test their class. The principal welcomes him. He's very, very honored to have a special rabbi come visit. So he walks into the classroom and he turns to the boys in there and he starts to ask them a few questions. Start with the giving of the Torah, where it all started. So he says to them, "Can you guys tell me who broke the tablets?" Nobody raises their hand. Finally, one boy in the back of the room raises his hand. He says, "Rabbi, I swear it wasn't me." Yeah? the rabbi thinks he's making a joke over here, so he turns to the teacher. Says, teacher, you didn't teach them about this? Do you not know who broke the tablets? He says, Rabbi, I'm telling you, it wasn't me. This rabbi is stunned. He walks out, he goes to the principal, he says, what is this? The teacher doesn't even know who broke the tablets. What kind of school is this? He says, Rabbi, you're coming all the way from Eastern Europe. We'll pay you the $30. How much did it cost already for your tablets? Forget about it, okay?
Oh,
Yeah? So this is the way
There you go.
some people may be familiar with the narrative of the broken tablets, right? But the giving of the Torah was something which was, it's pretty well known. People are pretty familiar with the story of the giving of the Torah, and it's something just passed down for all the generations, right? Throughout our history, we have been given this narrative of the giving of the Torah. So let's discuss it a little bit more and try to prove a little bit logically that this story occurred. Okay. So now, for the rest of this next little bit, we're going to assume that the story was totally made up. Let's come from the perspective, right? We're trying to prove logically something happened. So let's start the other way around. Let's assume that the story never happened. This story of the giving of the Torah, of Mount Sinai, of all the fun stuff, the thunder, lightning that we just spoke about, never actually happened. Let's try to figure out, how could such a story have started? We've all heard the story. We've all had grandmothers who believed the story. So let's figure out, where did these Bub and Mises come from? Yeah, where did these stories that our grandmas told us start? So there's two options for how it may have started. Some theories that people try to present, we're going to call them the first two. We're going to get to the third soon. But two theories might exist, are called past theory or present theory. Yeah, we'll start with present theory. Present theory is that there was a guy, his name was, let's call him Fred, let's call him Moses. Yeah, there was a guy named Moses, and he came to the Jewish people in the middle of a huge thunderstorm, tons of lightning outside, everyone's there, and he says, guys, did you just hear that? God just spoke, and God just said, and the people around believed it. That would be present tense. It's something which happened at the moment. Somebody came to them and said, you guys all just witnessed what I saw. Okay, that's one thing, one version of the story how it may have started. Another version of how the story may have began is something called past theory, right? That some guy, we'll call him Fred, came about one day and comes to the Jewish people and says, hey guys, you guys remember, or it comes to a group of people in a room, he says, you guys remember that your ancestors were given the Torah by Mount Sinai with tons of people there? And he convinces them that this story happened in the past. So present theory is that he's convincing something that happened in the present. Past theory is something that happened years ago. Yeah? Firstly, before we move on, which one do you think between those two is easier to accomplish? Past, right? Let's show why. Yeah, everybody here, let's do a quick exercise. I feel like you guys need to talk a little bit. Wake you guys up. So, everyone turn to the person next to you, and one of you speak to your friend. Convince them that you went to visit Alaska last summer. A year ago, you went to Alaska. Talk to your friend, try to be convincing. Convince them that you went to visit Alaska last summer. Go for it. Let's give 30 seconds for that.
Remember I told you last
Convince them that you went to Alaska. Your partner went to Alaska last summer. Talk about going to Alaska. What else have you been to Alaska? I didn't go to
Okay, let's pause. Okay, 1 second. Let's pause. Guys.
Okay.
So now, on your fingers, please show me from a scale to 1 to 5. 1 being totally not believable, 5 being you were totally sold. From the listeners, I want to see the listeners' fingers. From a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you believe that your partner went to Alaska?
If I heard, yeah.
Okay, I think that you guys failed, but other than that, it's not bad. Okay, now I want to switch positions. The listener will now become the talker, and the talker will now become the listener. Convince the other person that you both together went on a trip to Alaska last year. Let's try to convince each other that you went together last summer for the trip to Alaska. Let's pause over there. And now, once again, the listeners, I want to hear from you guys on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not believable at all, 5 being you're totally sold. How much do you believe that you went to Alaska last summer and not remembering it?
1.
1. Okay.
0.
Okay.
Never been to Alaska.
That's funny. You were more willing to believe that someone else went than you yourself went than someone else did. Huh? Special.
What's the
special.
point?
All the trips we had together, all the trips we took together.
Wow. Now you know it's a waste. Don't do it again. Okay. So I think that we all see from here that present theory is a little bit easier, a little bit harder to prove than past theory. Present theory means now, that I and you together just saw something that happened. We were there together. We were both in the same presence when the story occurred. It's pretty hard to believe, right? Hard to convince someone else that something happened to them that they don't remember. That would be the first version that we said. The first version that we said, the theory, was that Moses came on a mountain. Moses told the Jewish people, you guys, you all just heard God speaking. And we expect that 3 million people all said, oh yeah, we heard that. Right? The chance of that happening is very, very, very slim. It's almost impossible to say. Right? In general, if one guy maybe hit his head on the rock and comes and tells 3 million people that he saw something, everyone's going to say, go see a doctor maybe. Right? If only one person actually witnessed it, for him to be able to convince 3 million people is a very, very, very minute chance that it happened. Is it possible? It's possible.
But they've been wandering around in the desert for a long time. They would kind of believe anything.
That they themselves heard God's voice without having heard it?
Also a very long time.
I think that that's a little bit not realistic. To say that they believe themselves that they heard God's voice without having it happen. We'll get into it in more details in a minute, but that's just to understand what it is. And then, okay, so that's pretty established. I think that we can all understand that present theory never really happened. And that's why, we're going to get into more details soon, that's why we find that there's no religion that ever claimed that. There's no religion that came and ever said that you guys all witnessed something. Most religions started that one guy had a vision, one guy saw God, one guy had a message that God told him. He's here to spread it to all of you. He's here to tell you guys what he saw. But to claim that all of you saw something, you just don't remember it, it's a little bit hard to say, right? One guy would show up and say that you all just saw something occur. It's a very, very slim chance you'll believe it, especially when we're talking about Jews. Jews don't believe nothing, right? So if you're standing in a crowd of 3 million people, or let's say 2 million people if you prefer that, or Omer's version, 4 million people, the fact that Moses would come down and say, you guys all just witnessed God giving us the Torah, you just heard God's voice, you just saw all of this occurrence, and none of it actually happened, is basically impossible to say that actually happened. Right? To convince them present tense that you just saw something is very, very rare chance of that being true.
רבי,
כן.
הערב רב, גם ראו, גם חזו, או היו
גם.
בצד?
הם היו שם.
גם שמעו את הקדוש ברוך הוא?
כן.
הערב רב.
כן. כולם היו שם. Okay. So now, right, so the present theory I think that we can pretty much assume is not what happened. To say that right now something happened. Let's read this inside. This is from a text which comes from a guy named Rabbi David Gottlieb. He's a rabbi who wrote about this type of proof, the type of logic. It's text number 4 on page 197, or text number 4 on page 74 in the Hebrew. If someone wants to read it for us, I guess Scott, you're the only one on the table who hasn't. You want to take it for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Imagine someone making up the story and trying to sell it. He's going to come to a group of people and he is going to tell them that sometime in the past their ancestors stood at a mountain and heard God speak. He is not talking about people in China or Tibet. He is talking about the ancestors of his audience. He is claiming that God revealed himself to all their ancestors simultaneously and by doing so founded a new religion.
Okay, let's continue on the next page. Now this is going to go into more the past theory, right? Until now we spoke about the present theory. Now we're going to discuss a little bit more about the past theory. Okay, let's go into it. Let's continue.
What is the question with which the audience will confront him? The obvious question is, if this happened to our ancestors, How is that no one knows about it but you? What happened to the memory of that event? Everybody simply forgot it. They were more interested in the soccer scores. No one told us about it. The whole religion just disappeared. It is simply not credible to tell an entire nation that their collective ancestors witnessed such an earth-shattering event and that it was forgotten. It would be impossible to explain why the memory of the event disappeared. The person inventing the story and trying to sell it will never succeed.
Thank you. Okay, so now we already established present theory probably didn't happen. To say that somebody came right now and said you just saw something is very, very hard to convince, right? Usually religions start with one guy who had a vision, right? And he'll tell you about it. To say that all of you saw something is not very realistic, right? I'm sorry, let's go put it on the board. I was behind the slides.
Pinocchio?
Yeah, right? He's clearly a liar. If someone claims that the listener, right? Let's understand together. Why is it that it's not possible? It's because if I'm here to tell you something that you should have known on your own, and I'm going to convince you something that you didn't know, and I have to have a really, really good reason why you didn't know of it. Right? If I'm going to tell you that you were somewhere in Alaska, you're going to have a really good reason why I don't have any recollection of this, but you do. And that's one of the problems with the present theory, and it would be a very similar one with the past theory. Because what's the past theory claim, right? Fred shows up, and Fred tells you, by the way, the group of you guys in this room, I want to tell you, I had a vision from God that he came to remind me of something which all of our ancestors a few generations ago saw. And you guys are going to all believe me, chances are pretty slim. Right? You're going to believe me that all of your ancestors were there. Yeah? Any of you come from Russia? Yeah? Your grandparents? You know that our grandparents actually were both part of an important board in the city of Dakshitz, right? Your grandmother was also there, right? They were all part of an important board of leaders in the city over there, right? After a very, very short amount of time of me trying to convince you something that happened to your grandmother, you're going to realize that that doesn't really add up. Right? Because my grandmother was actually not in the city of Dakshitz, she was in a totally different town over. Right? I was actually in this type of city, and your story doesn't really add up with the details. So that's one of the problems. If this is something which you should have known about, you should have known that your grandmother was in such a city, or she was such an important figure, and you never heard about it, it'd be kind of hard to convince you that this happened to your grandmother. And so the problem with past theory is for for Fred to show up and to tell the Jewish people, by the way, you should know that all of you have great-grandmothers who experienced God's giving of the Torah 500 years ago. For him to convince them that they all had grandmothers, and for a whole nation to start following it on the belief of something that they should have known, it's not very realistic. Because they're going to say, well, why didn't I know about it until now? Where were you until now? How did everybody forget about it besides for you? If only one guy remembers it happening, right, so he'll tell them, oh, all of you guys had a tough history and you had a blizzard that occurred to your town, so your grandmothers didn't remember to tell you about it. But my mother was very strong, she survived the blizzard to tell me about it. It's not very realistic. Because if he knows about it, I'm sure there's somebody else who knows about it. There were 3 million people in his original story. So none of the kids remembered it besides for this one guy? Or this few group of guys? 3, 4 guys, whatever it's going to be that started it? To say that we're going to convince you of something that only he knows about is very, very hard to believe. Another problem with the past theory is that if it's such an important thing, right, it's almost impossible that everyone would have forgotten about it. Right? So I understand you're telling me that you were the only one who remembers it for whatever reason. How could it be that no one else remembered it? Right? So number one, why didn't I know about it? Number two, how could it be that the story got forgotten in the first place? So you're going to have a really good story of how this whole thing occurred. God himself was revealed. The whole world was talking about it. Everybody knew about it. And suddenly, people stopped telling the story. People stopped telling their kids about it until Fred showed up and reminded us all of it. It's kind of hard to believe that such a thing could have occurred. That everybody forgot about this important moment of history. Yeah? You guys all believe that George Washington existed?
Yes.
Why do you believe it?
History.
It's history. It's in the books. This is also in the Torah. Right? Why would you believe that it? Because so many people saw him. So many people told their kids about stories of George Washington. So many people can attest to having it happen. And so there's no reason to assume otherwise. Everybody had seen him, right? There's enough people who had enough evidence to say that it happened. If one guy showed up and said, by the way, George Washington wasn't actually the general at the time, it was actually a guy named Albert, but Albert blamed a guy named George Washington. It'd be pretty hard to convince people of this story. Because if everybody knows of a different account, if everybody knows of a different story, for you to come and tell them, by the way, actually the story happened a little different, Actually, there's another part of the story you never heard about. It'd be pretty hard to convince. Yeah? Imagine I come to convince you that, guys, and that in the 1800s, America actually became communist for a little bit. They killed out about half the nation, the government, but then they covered it over, so nobody knows about it. Yeah? Chances are, we would say that never really happened. Because for one person to know something which everybody else should have known, and somehow forgot about it, is not very realistic.
Yes, but people can be biased.
Not relevant. Okay. One more problem with this is that anybody here can name me a famous Jewish personality. Yeah? Name me somebody from the Torah.
From the Torah? Daniel.
Daniel, Moshe, Moses. Anybody else knows anybody else? David.
Shimon.
Somebody from the later generations. Shimon. Yeah? Did you say Shimshon? Okay. Yeah? You know a bunch of people from the Torah. Yeah?
Yeah.
Everybody here remembers the famous person from the Torah, Fred?
No.
No?
Who's Fred?
Fred, yeah. Imagine, right, if this was a story that happened, that everybody, the whole story of Moses and Daniel and all these stories happened, but everybody forgot about it. And then Fred came and reminded us all about this important religion that we were all supposed to follow, but we forgot about. For us to believe that this happened, I think that we would have it written down that Fred the Savior, Fred helped us all remember our religion. Fred reminded us all of the giving of the Torah. We all forgot about it. Fred reminded us he would be a real hero that we all would have known about. The fact that we've never heard of such a Fred, of somebody who came to tell us and remind us of the important heritage that we have, it's something that would definitely be documented, definitely be recorded, at least in a few places.
Right.
Yet we don't find any accounting of somebody who came to remind us about this vision of God by Mount Sinai. So the fact that this occurrence of God at Mount Sinai occurred couldn't have been something that Moses convinced them that they heard then. Because present theory, we said, is very, very difficult and almost impossible. Past theory also can't be. That somebody came to tell you guys that your grandmother and 3 million of your grandparents were all there and saw something, and I'm the only one who remembers it. It's not very realistic. Okay. Let's read together page 197. See this a little bit more spelled out. 197. Oh, we just did that. Sorry. 197 we just did. Text 4. Okay. Let's read this second aspect, page 198, text 5. In the Hebrew, page 75, text 5. Yeah, someone want to read for us? Someone hasn't read yet? Anybody want to read who hasn't read yet? Elaine, you want to take it for us? Only if you'd like to.
A major problem with this theory is that we've never heard of Fred or his heroic resurrection of Judaism. Certainly one of the most significant events in Jewish history would have been the fumble when world Jewry forgot that there were the 3 million prophets in the recovery, when Fred reminded the Jews about the national prophecy at Mount Sinai. Yet in an otherwise comprehensive Jewish history, we find no mention of such a claim. Jewish texts describe myriad historical crises and the heroes who assisted during these difficult times. We know that Moses brought the Torah down from Mount Sinai. Joshua first brought the Jews into the land of Israel. David slew Goliath. Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, and Ezra brought the Jews back to the land of Israel after the Babylonian exile. We know that Rabbi Judah, the prince, compiled the Mishnah, and that Ravina and Rav Ashi compiled the Talmud. We know about Maimonides, and hundreds of other stars of medieval Jewry and what their respective contributions were. We process detailed records about every great Jewish personality except for one. We don't have any mention of the man who reminded Jewry that they were the only people in human history ever to experience national prophecy, and we don't have any record of the amnesia Fred rescued them from. Until 200 years ago, every Jew and member of a Jewish breakaway group like the Christians, Sadducees, and Karaite affirmed that ancient Jewry, their direct ancestors, had experienced national prophecy at Mount Sinai. Not a single ancient or contemporary individual or religious community has any tradition about the man who should have been the second greatest hero of Jewish history. Fred, why?
Yeah, so none of the Christian versions and none of the other versions of Jewish history will tell you that there was a man named Fred who made up the whole story. No other religion will claim that somebody came to tell the Jewish people what happened to their grandfathers. So you might be able to say that, oh, well, one of the heroes that we know about, maybe it was King David, who made up the whole story and reminded them what happened earlier. But if that was such an important role, we would have definitely heard that David did such a thing like that. Right? If there was somebody in Jewish history who reminded all the Jews that their grandparents, 3 million of them, saw the giving of the Torah, we would definitely have heard about this guy. Right? So to say that this guy just wasn't remembered, even though he did such the most important thing ever, is kind of hard to believe. Right? Okay. So it seems like the past theory, the present theory is not an option. The past theory as well seems to be not very, very realistic, seems to be almost not possible. Right? Okay. Anybody have any questions on those two theories before we move on to one more? Any questions? Comments? Concerns?
When you say theory, they basically make it up to make it sound logical, yes?
It's an option of what might have occurred. How could we know of the story of the giving of the Torah without it having actually happened? And neither of those two theories, or those two options of stories of how they started, are realistic.
But Judaism, it's more about belief, would you say?
We're talking logic today. We're not talking belief. Okay, so now logically, past theory, present theory are out. Now we need to try a new option. This option sounds a little bit more realistic, and let's assess it a little bit more. The next option is going to be called the snowball theory. Yeah, anyone have Californians don't know what snowball is? Yeah? How do you make a snowball? Anyone here made a snowman? Yeah?
It's interesting.
The way you make a snowman is you take a little bit of snow,
Yeah.
and you roll it and roll it and roll it, and suddenly it becomes bigger and bigger. Yeah, you roll it down, and it becomes bigger. At least that's what I heard. I never actually did it. I'm from California. Okay, yeah? So what's the snowball theory? The snowball theory would be as follows. Yeah? That what happened was, there was one group of people, or something occurred, right? Moses came and said that he himself had a vision. Just like Islam, just like any of these other religions started, one guy came and said he had a vision. So that's how it started. He had a personal vision that he saw the Ten Commandments from God. And he told a few people around him. Then, years later, the story grew and grew. Yeah, everyone ever heard the story grows a tail, right? So what happened was Moses told his generation that he saw God, and none of them did. They told their children that. A few generations later, they started to say, oh, all of them saw the giving of the Torah. That's an option which sounds a little bit more realistic than the first two theories, right? That what actually happened was Moses made up the whole thing. Moses said that he was the only one who saw God. He didn't try convincing them that they did. That was not possible. He tried to convince them that he saw God. They all believed him. But after time goes on, people started to believe that, oh, maybe that what happened was that all of them saw God. Right? Until some were down the line, they wrote down that that was the story that happened. Right? Okay. So this sounds a little bit more realistic, but let's see the problem of that. Right? If you look at any other religion that's out there today, all of the religions claim that there was one man who had a vision. There was one man who saw something, saw God. God came to him and told him, follow me and do this and this and this. And everybody followed him. No other religion had such a story happen to them. That it suddenly turned into that all of them saw it. No other religion claimed that there were so many people who experienced a revelation of God. Science says if something occurred, chances are it's going to occur again. Right? If it's something which is very plausible to have happened, it will probably happen again. So if Christianity claimed that there was one guy who got a vision from God, how did that stay accurate and it didn't turn into, oh, there were hundreds of people who got a revelation of God? Right? We'll get into this in more detail, but let's first read it inside. Page 200, text 6a. Anybody hasn't read yet who wants to? Kat, you've been quiet today. Want to read?
Jesus, no voice.
Yes.
Okay,
The beginning
thank you.
of all ancient and modern religions have a common thread. One or two people have a revelation and persuade others to follow. Thus, for example, Buddhist writings tell us the Prince Siddhartha Gautama launched Buddhism after his solitary ascendance through the 8th stage of transic insight. Islamic texts tell us that Muhammad founded Islam following the first of many personal prophetic experiences. Christian writings reveal that Paul first met Jesus, converted to Christianity, and spread the faith more than 3 decades after Jesus' death. Joseph Smith Jr. and his partner Oliver Cowdery launched the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. After the two men were visited by angels and long-dead disciples of Jesus and Sun Myung Moon launched the Unification Church after privately receiving direct orders to do so from Jesus himself, the beginning of Children of God. Christian Science, Ekankar, Elon Vital, I Am, and the Osophi, in fact, the beginning of all world religions, are equally unverifiable. Never does a large, clearly identifiable group of people experience prophecy and live to tell others about it. Moreover, in a handful of cases wherein large groups of people supposedly witness miracles, rarely are these witnesses named or identified in any way that would allow for verification, and in the very exceptional case involving clarity identified groups of witnesses. Never more than one or two of the religion's current adherents claims to have met or descended directly from the named witnesses. In all these cases, the religion's credibility rests on the credibility of its one or two founders. While it is certainly possible that the beginnings claimed by any of the thousands of sects and cults included in the world's more than 300 major religious traditions could be true, it is easy to imagine how charismatic charlatans could have launched any of those movements. The one known exemption to this rule is Judaism.
Thank you. There's a little bit of a history of learning about all the religions. I didn't know a lot of that stuff either. Perfectly fine. Point being, in short, there are many, many other religions which say that God appeared to one person, God appeared to 2, 3 people, and convinced them and told them something. They went and spread it to everybody else. Every religion claims that there was max 2, 3 people who experienced this revelation. There's no religion that claims that there were 3 million people present when God revealed himself. The one exception being Judaism. Right? That we have a tradition that we know that God appeared to 3 million people and we all experienced it together. There's no other religion that claims that. Right? And most of their religions also have the Old Testament, which have the same claim. All of them, almost all religions, are based on, and they know that God appeared to the Jewish people with 3 million people.
Yes,
but now one person came later and changed it. So you're going to change the whole fact of 3 million people seeing God because 1 or 2 people saw a different vision later? Right? 1 or 2 people came around later to change what 3 million people witnessed themselves? There's no other religion that claims that there were 3 million people who had a new tradition that was being talked about. Yeah?
And correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't think that anyone came across any documentation of objection to this. Anything that is written anywhere that basically declines or denies the story from ancient times, anywhere from the Qumran caves or even earlier than that. There is no factual battle of this.
No one challenges the fact that God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai. No other religion, that is, claims that it never happened. Right? I mean, pretty much. There are some that started new, but most of them are based on the same Torah, based on the fact that God appeared to the Jewish people in front of 3 million people on Mount Sinai. Yet they have 1 or 2 people who came later, had a different vision and changed things. Right? Nobody claims it except for one religion. There is one religion which claims that God appeared to a bunch of people, but at the end of that vision, they all died. So one person came to tell everybody about what happened to millions of people. Still, it's based on one person, but let's just read that inside so we can see the one account. Otherwise, text 6b, page 201, on page 77 in the Hebrew. Yeah, someone want to read it for us? Rafael, you want to read? No? Yitzchak, you want to read it for us? Marcelo? No?
Please read.
Dr. Mark, you want to? Text 6b, 201.
Some Indian groups once possessed an oral tradition that the Hindu god Krishna addressed millions of warriors who participated in the battle described in the Bhagavad Gita, a basic Hindu text. This is not a challenge to observation, however, since the same oral tradition also reports that all those who heard Krishna speak died in the battle. No witnesses survived to testify of the experience in the sort of this mass prophecy. It's only known that the God revealed is to an unnamed individual later in history.
Thank you. So again, even that claim that there was a mass revelation was to one person who came later on to tell everybody else about what happened to millions of people. So it may have occurred to millions of people, but they all died and there's only one person that we're trusting that this vision occurred. The only religion to claim otherwise is the Jewish people. The Jewish people claim that God appeared to 3 million of us together and we survived. And that's a very, very important thing to notice, right? There were so many people that were there. How could it have started this lie? The lie couldn't have started at the time, couldn't have came later that someone told them about it, and it couldn't have ever been replicated, snowballed, because if it snowballed and the story grew, then where did it come from? How did it begin? And if you want to say that, oh, it started as a few people had it, and they later on changed the story to being a few million, well, this should have repeated itself. Let's read about the way science works, page 202, text 7.
But science evolves, Menachem Mendel.
Correct. No, exactly.
Or it does not evolve.
Correct. And if so, we should have a different religion by now who claims a similar revelation like that at Sinai. But nobody did. Right? Okay, let's read that together. Page 202, text 7. Someone want to take a second turn? I think everyone wants to read red already. Go for it.
A basic assumption of scientific method is that results are replicable. If something happens naturally once, we expect that it will happen more than once. Although history is not science, everyone knows that history repeats itself. Not in every last detail, but at least in general. Thousands of religions have existed in the world. Nobody has documented a single one that has the same claim as Judaism. If the story evolved naturally or was perpetrated as a hoax, why has it not happened more than once? And since it hasn't, is it irrational to believe in Sinai? Who is relying on blind faith? The one who believes in the story as written, or the one that claims, without any historical support, that it was a result of natural processes, but only happened one time to one group in all of recorded history? And this simple objection will apply to any natural explanation that anyone will ever propose to discredit the authenticity of the Sinai revelation. If it is natural, then why did it happen only once in recorded history?
Yeah, anyone here has a gold ring? Yeah, that gold ring actually that my mother has is very special because there's a cow, lives a few blocks away. Yeah, the cow, when he goes to the bathroom, his manure, if you let it sit for a little bit, it actually turns into gold. So I'm going to sell you guys, if you want, some special manure after class. I have some in my car, and it'll only be $100 per box, but it's 14 karat gold, good quality. You'll get tons of gold to be able to make afterwards, right? Even if I could show you that ring and say that this actually is from cow manure, I don't think any of you are going to buy this cow manure from me. Because even if you say that it's true and I believe you that it's true, then do it again. Do it in front of me. Show me that this turned into a ring on the spot, right? If anybody wants to say that the snowball theory happened, so then it should definitely have occurred since then, right? If somebody's making up Christianity, so if it's intentional, then they should have made up the story that it occurred to many millions of people. It's a lot more believable than to say it occurred to one person. And if you want to say that it just happened itself, well then it should have happened itself to other religions as well. Yet we don't find this anywhere else. That any other religion, either intentionally or just happened to be, that their stories have changed. Yeah? You guys know the joke? There was a rabbi and a priest. Yeah? Not walking into a bar, they were walking on water. Yeah? They were talking to each other. They were standing by the river, and the rabbi says to the priest, let me show you something. You believe in Yoshka because you walk on water? If I would walk on water now, would you believe in me? The priest says, sure, of course. So the rabbi goes and sure enough, walks across the lake. The priest is fascinated. The rabbi says, okay, come across. You join me. The priest takes 3 steps in, falls, splash. Wow, rabbi, let me ask you, how did you do it? The rabbi says, well, I'll tell you a secret. I know where the rocks are. Yeah? So
the rocks.
Yeah, if the religion was made up, it started that one person walked on the water, and later turned into a theory that millions of people walked on the water, then maybe I would start to say, okay, we have a comparative. We don't find any comparative which ever occurred that a religion's theory snowballed into many people. That many people had this revelation. Why not? Why didn't it ever happen? Because it's not realistic. At some point, the jump is too big. Right? For one generation to tell the next generation there was one man who had a vision. And they would tell the next generation one man had a vision. Suddenly, a whole generation happens to, by mistake, understand that there were millions of people who had a revelation. Even if one person had that mistake, That somebody told him broken telephone, that not Moses had a vision and told 3 million. That 3 million did it, all of his friends in his class would say, no, your mom told you the story wrong. Right? All of his classmates would tell him, that's not what my grandmother told me, because she said that there was only one person who had a vision. Right? So to say that this happened to have come, it would have been corrected at some point. To say that suddenly in one generation everybody got convinced that that's what happened is not very realistic. Because again, if you say that he made it up, one person made up that it was really in front of a lot more people, then where's Fred? Where's that guy who helped us understand that it was really to a lot more? It's the same amnesia issue, right? That one man, that they all forgot that it was to millions of people, and they thought it was only to one, but in truth it was to many. And if it's something which happened to be, if it happened to be that way, then again, why didn't it ever happen again?
Why should it happen again?
If it's something, well, are you thinking that it's intentional or it happened to
Even
be?
Muhammad and even Jesus, it happened to them one time and that's it.
Right, so why didn't it become that millions of people saw God? Why is it only that they claim that one person did? Why don't they claim that millions of people saw God? Because it's something which is not believable. It's not believable to convince people that millions of people saw God. If it would have been, then the people who created Islam or whatever it is would have said that story. So if it was intentional, then other people would have done it. If it's something which just happened to be, then why didn't it just happen to be that people understood that there was a group of people with Yashka that believed that story? Why didn't they claim that?
Well, they claim that there are a few people that saw that it is...
3, 4.
Huh?
3 or 4 people. Not 1,000, not 10,000, not 1 million, not 3 million. Right? 3 or 4 people can sit together and make up a story. To say that 3 million people made up a story is a little bit harder. And also, and this is the main thing, right, is also that if it was something that would have been made up at some point, how did so many people buy into it? If everybody told their kids that there was one person, everybody told the next generation that there was one person who had a vision. At what point could some people start saying that it was 3 million? You'd have to convince the whole generation at the time that they have the story wrong. And how would they be able to convince everybody there, all the millions of Jews, that they all have the wrong version, that it wasn't just God appearing to Moses, and it really appeared to all of them? Right? You'd have to have a pretty strong claim to convince them that all of them didn't get the right story, and he does have the right story.
What we can see that it happens, you can convince people to believe that...
That 1 or 2 people. But not that all of their grandparents, all of you guys have a thing that your grandmothers told you, they were all wrong besides for my grandmother. If you say that all of your grandmothers have the story wrong besides for mine, it's not going to be very believable. So if all of the generation knew that God only appeared to Moshe, and then one guy comes and says, no, he appeared to millions of people, they would all say that you probably have the wrong story if the rest of the generation has it different. So at what point could this lie have started? It couldn't have started in the middle of a generation where all of them have a different version. Okay. Let's read, and it's by the way fascinating that Moshe himself points out this fact to the Jewish people. He tells them, it's more of a casual statement, but we see from it, Moshe tells the Jewish people that there is never and there will never be another nation which claims that God appeared to all of them and they survived. Let's read that together in Moshe's words, page 203, text 8, or page 78 in the Hebrew, text 8, yeah? And someone want to read for us? Michal, go for it.
For ask now regarding the early days that were before you, since the day that God created man upon the earth, and from one end of the heavens to the other end of the heavens, whether there was anything like this great thing, or was the likes of it heard? Did ever a people hear God's voice speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard and lived?
Right, so Moshe is saying, was there ever any other group that had such a revelation? And not only did it happen in actuality, but Moshe is also saying, was there ever anybody that claimed it? Right? Meaning Moshe is telling Jewish people, you guys, all of you witnessed God. There never was anybody else who saw God face to face like you have. You guys are unique people. You have a revelation that God came to you guys that nobody else ever experienced. Treasure this, because this is something important. That we have a tradition that we all saw God. Remember that we saw God, and keep that faith, that practicing of the religion, strong and true. Okay. Any questions on this? Yeah.
Not a question, but a comment. Some years ago, I recall seeing a show on The Natural something, and it was literally, maybe, I don't remember what it was called, but it was to debunk the entire Eser Makot, the 10 plagues, and Moshe, and again in a scientific way. And again, they went through it, and the 10 plagues, they went through each one and made scientific.
Okay, so let me tell you a good joke.
When they got to Moshe, they said to one person, Moses, he could have written this whole thing as a story. So now with this, you're saying millions of people heard him, but what if, like these people say it like a scientific debunking, said that he wrote that millions of people wrote it.
And why would anybody believe him?
Exactly.
That's what I'm asking. Why would anybody believe one guy who wrote that all of your grandparents saw it?
And also, if you read the Torah and you see what Moshe, it's like somebody's gonna write about himself that basically he really didn't wanted to be the part of the story, because that's the story of Moses. He didn't want to be part of the story. It's kind of like,
you know the joke. There's a kid who comes home.
Well, again, I'm gonna just wrap it up. In a way, I saw it then, sheker and aglaim, because there's too many pieces of it to be put together.
Right. And that's what I'm getting to. There's a kid comes home from school and tells his dad, you know, Dad, we're coming close to Passover. My teacher told me today, I don't think I said this story. If I did, I apologize. Yeah, I said, my teacher told me today that the Jewish people left Egypt, and when they were leaving Egypt, they came to an ocean, and it was impossible to cross, and there was the Egyptians chasing them. So they pulled out their grenades, and they threw it, and a lot of the Egyptians died, and they let out a quick bridge that they made with the different tanks. They lined up to be able to cross, and they were able to barely climb over with all the tanks piled up to get across. The father said, wow, your teacher taught you that? Mm-hmm. And he says, well, that wasn't exactly the way he said it, but you would never believe the version he told us. Yeah? So the same is true, right? Sometimes, like we started off, is there room for conspiracy theories? There's always going to be. You can also tell me that my brain is in a vat, and I will never be able to prove you wrong, so to say. Right? You can tell me that we never experienced anything. Can I say it's beyond the shadow of a doubt that these guys? I can't. And therefore, conspiracy theories can always exist. Right? We all know that America did 9/11, and we all know that really it was the Jews, right, who did 9/11. Right? You can come up with conspiracy theories, and I can bring you proofs, and there are full movies about these. Right? These claims all have full movies and studies. Right? But obviously, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. There might be unreasonable doubt, which you could come up to debunk it, but we're talking, is it more realistic to assume like this or more like that? And in a certain sense, at a certain point, it comes to faith, right? In other words, these atheists need to have such a strong faith that this didn't happen to come up with a theory which is going to sound less realistic than this. It's a certain matter of faith that they have. Yeah, there's a famous joke about the atheist convention, right? All the atheists get together to practice about the fact that they don't believe that we belong together because we're all making up a story. Okay, sorry, I'll get to you in a second. David, first, yeah.
So it's a question I've been thinking of since the first class that we've had, and I've held it in abeyance, and I know we're coming to the end of this class, and you've made very thoughtful points throughout about Yom Tov Shini and everything like that. But this is something, and for me it is a matter of faith, but I don't have to throw out logic in order to have it. And I think that logic suggests to me that it's more likely that there was revelation than not. But here's the question I have related to that. We've been going under the assumption, you have, that God gave Moses the written and the oral law. Do we believe, and I'm just going to ask a question and follow it up if I may. Do we believe, or do you believe, that Moses had any supernatural qualities?
So, was he a human? Yes, but at the same time, he was definitely much smarter than us. He definitely had revelations of God, and he had a pretty good teacher, right? God was teaching him.
Right, but he was human.
He was human, yes.
How did Moses remember the entire Torah, and I'm not asking this in a heretical way, I'd really like to know, the entire Torah and the entire oral law, and pass it down from generation to generation if he only was a human being?
So you ever looked in the Torah and you see that there's little paragraphs? You know that there's paragraphs between the Torah, it's not just one long run-on text. So it says that when God told Moshe, taught him all the things, he would teach him an idea, and then they would pause, and Moshe would have time to review, and then they would continue. Each of those paragraphs is a time that Moshe had to be able to review what he was taught. And as soon as he came down from the mountain, we discussed this in, I forgot if it was the second or third class, he would do review 4 times. He He would teach it to Aaron,
Right.
who would teach it to the 70 elders, teach it to Aaron's sons, and then the 70 elders, and then to all the Jewish people. There was a lot of review, and there was a lot of making sure that he got everything properly.
There are 2,100 pages in the Talmud, something like that.
So a lot of that is from the 13 steps that were derived. We said there was rules. When God told things to Moshe, he didn't tell him all of the minute details. He told him ways to be able to understand the godly concepts, how to learn out all of the 1,300 pages of the Talmud. He didn't tell him each of those words necessarily, each word. He told him how you can do it. And when you follow, just like the Sudoku board, right? When you follow those principles which God gave, you're going to be able to come to the right conclusion that God wants. And that's what God drilled into Moshe's head, to understand how to properly learn the Torah. When you follow the proper learning of the Torah, you're going to get to the proper understanding.
And the written law Moses knew by heart?
So no, God dictated word for word what to write. It says about the last 8 psukim, which speak about Moses dying, that God told Moshe, write the word that Moses died, and Moshe said, but I don't want to. And God said, you're crying right now, take your tears, use those tears to write it. But God said, you have to write it because the Torah needs to be complete.
Right. Again, not being heretical, it's a burning question for me.
For sure.
I don't have to know the answer to it. For me, it's a matter of faith. But Moshe wrote down, first of all, at least the first 4 books of the Torah by hand on tablets.
Not on tablets.
Right.
On scrolls.
On scrolls.
On scrolls, yeah. The tablets was just the 10 commandments. And then later on the certain other commands that God told him, but pretty much, yeah.
So he wrote that on top, he wrote it on top of Mount Sinai?
The tablets were made on top of Mount Sinai.
Right.
The rest of the Torah,
He came down.
he wrote it the second time that he went up on Mount Sinai. He got a little bit more of the Torah. That's when he wrote down some of it. But again, only till that point in history, which wasn't so much of the Torah. A lot of the Torah stories happened after that, and as they were traveling, God dictated to him what to write. Yeah.
I wanted to make a comment about about our friend over here that saw the program in National Geographic. I think I'm almost positive that I saw the same thing about the debunking, and it's not exactly the debunking. What I came with when I saw that and I watched it, it was fascinating. It made me basically, I do not see it as debunking, as a natural explanation. How come the Nile became red? As if Moses hit it with a stick and boom, everything becomes blood. There was like natural process of the probability. How can the Nile turn red for reasons that are
So what I think is that
geological
right.
and with soils and things like that. And for that, with these type of explanations to each plague, to each makkah.
So what I think is that if all those things happen to randomly align so perfectly, it's more faith than that God is involved.
What made me think when I came out of this, or when I concluded this program, it goes also on some people's beliefs, such as myself, that maybe God did not create the world in 6 days, and it's metaphorically, it's symbolically, maybe he did not create on Tuesday all the animals. Maybe it's a way of form of, maybe it was a stretch of 600,000 years that in our world, in our little brains, is being interpreted as Tuesday,
So again,
Yom Kippur, or Wednesday. But maybe it's 600 million years that it took him to create the sun. I don't know. I don't have the solutions, but it's not about debunking. It's about allowing logic to certain processes that are not magic, that are not like Moses the magician, hit it with a stick and boom. It's like like the.
Can I just comment on it?
Let me just finish. Yeah, so I think that it takes a little bit more faith to believe that all these things happen to line up so perfectly. And Moshe happened to discover all these scientific things in a row, 10 plagues, and the water happened to be at the right season right now. I've seen that before. The water happened to be at the exact season, the water gets a little bit lower, then they will go across.
That's what the Egyptians believe. They were always convincing Pharaoh that there is logic to...
But if you're going to be able to go and say that all these stories, right, they're not challenging that they happened. They're trying to show to you scientifically how it could have occurred based on science. Okay, I think it takes a little bit more faith to believe that version of the story than to believe our narrative. Yeah, it takes a pretty strong faith to believe that all these things just happen to be at the exact right moment in the way that they wanted to picture it.
Not
Right?
only-
And I'm not going to get into the discussion about the creation of the 6 days. It's totally separate discussion. We could have it at a different time. I don't think it's very connected, but yeah.
I have seen this show you guys are talking.
Not only that, but to what you said.
Sorry, Kat's talking, and then.
One second.
I'm sorry.
Just one, I just can't hear both of this.
The whole thing, yes, I've seen it. The whole idea is that everything that's already on this earth is already here. It's already organic matter that's here. The fact that it happened at the right time and the right moment, and it came together, that's the miracle.
That's God.
And that's the 10 plagues that happened. God didn't bring anything unnatural into this world and make that happen. It was
Use
just
nature
like
to
that
make
spark
it.
that you need in chemistry class, you always need an accelerator to make something that's like the match to fire it, and that's God. God is the accelerator.
But if you're already believing that it's God is making it happen, why not just believe the way it says it in the Torah that God actually made the water turn into blood?
Totally agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Last
Just
point,
one
and then
other-
let's
yes.
finish up.
So as I
Getting
include
late.
to this, again, they said that they made a claim of how it could happen, but for 3,500 years,
Right.
it didn't happen. So you said something to that, it's only happened once.
Yeah. Okay.
One
Very
more
good. Yeah,
quick
those
thing,
things never
one more
occurred
quick
again.
thing.
Yeah.
One more quick thing, there was something unnatural, at least that I know of, which was fire within ice, which doesn't happen, that's not natural.
So they might have different claims, but again, to believe any of those claims and that they all lined up, I think is a little bit more belief than to believe that God is involved. Okay. Let's finish up with a very important letter of the Rebbe. The Rebbe brought this idea a few times, but let's see it together on page 204, text 9, where the Rebbe spelled this out for us in a little bit of what we should take away from this. And with this, we're going to conclude for tonight with a little bit of a review video and call it a night. So, text 9, page 204. Someone want to read it for us? Scott, you want to take it?
Okay, the divine revelation of Mount Sinai was in fact witnessed by millions of people, all of whom reported it to its manifested tale, accurately for the whole people of Israel stood at Mount Sinai and witnessed it. We know that this is a fact because millions of Jews in our day accepted it as such, because they received it as such from their own parents, and these millions in turn received the evidence from the previous generation, and so on in an uninterrupted chain of transmitted evidence from millions to millions of witnesses, generation after generation, back to the original millions of witnesses who saw the event with their own eyes. Among those original witnesses, there were many who were initiated in the science of those days, vis-a-vis Egypt, many achievements of which are still baffling nowadays. Among them were philosophers and thinkers, as well as ignorant and uneducated persons, women and children of all ages. Yet all of them reported the event and phenomena connected with it without contradiction to one another. Such a fact is certainly indisputable. I do not believe that there is another fact which can match it for evidence and accuracy. To deny such a fact is anything but scientific. It is the very opposite of science. Parenthetically, it is unfortunate that this basic difference between the Jewish religion and those of others is so little known, for the Jewish religion is the only one that is not based on a single founder or a few, but is based on the divine revelation witnessed by all the people, numbering several million. The answer is also statements that the acceptance of the Torah as being the only truth is dangerous, since its authors were only men. As men, they could not have been infallible. Jews accept the Torah precisely because it was given by God, not by man, and it was given in the presence of millions of people who had seen it and heard it with their own eyes and ears. That is why the Torah is the absolute truth, for God is absolute. And that's why I answered that first question tonight. It really wasn't that important for me, because this is what I believe, that it's got to be true if it's gone all this time without.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. But that is very important.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. That is pretty important.
Yeah.
So I'd say one.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, ultimately, as you've mentioned, right, if you want to believe otherwise, there's always a little bit of doubt, and you can make whole movies out of it, right? But ultimately, if you're still struggling with this within yourself, try to get involved in Judaism. You do a practical mitzvah. You do a practical mitzvah. Now, the Rebbe pushed many times. You do a practical mitzvah. You'll feel the meaning of it. You'll get involved in the ideas of believing. And the more you get involved in the ways of Judaism, the more you're going to come to recognize the truth of it. Because when you get involved, when you experience something, you actually have to do with it. You'll be able to appreciate it even more. For this, I want to conclude with a summary video, and then we will conclude for the night, just with 2 or 3 parting words, and we're going to be done. So page 80 in the Hebrew books, if you want to read it in Hebrew. For the English, you can read it on
Lesson 6.
206, or watch it
One.
online.
For thousands of years, our people have believed that God revealed himself to our ancestors and addressed them at Mount Sinai. 2. It is unlikely that someone could falsely convince an entire nation that they themselves experienced a divine revelation. 3. It is unlikely that someone could falsely persuade an entire nation that all their ancestors experienced a divine revelation. The listeners would have refused to accept this, asserting that if it were true, they certainly would have heard of this from their parents. 4. If someone single-handedly reminded the Jewish people of the Sinai event, this person would be duly recognized in the record of Jewish history. 5. The fact that no other religious group lays claim to a mass revelation highlights the uniqueness of the Jewish faith. 6. It is unlikely that the Sinai narrative began as a story of a revelation to a few that snowballed into a story of mass revelation. If this were a possibility, it would have been replicated by others.
Okay. With this, we do conclude this. Question on this? Let me just finish up first. Yeah, what was it?
I just wanted to say that's why they all hate us, because they know the truth.
Okay, yeah. So with this, we conclude the course. Firstly, thank you all who participated in it. I think that we really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Hope that you guys did as well. If you do have any feedback for the future, we are going to be doing more courses. So if you have any good, whether constructive or you think it's destructive, I'll find constructive criticism, please send it my way. I would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about the course in general. I would love to hear from you guys. Right now we do a summer break, but God willing, after Sukkot, in about October, November time, we're going to start a new course. I will send all of you the info then. Look out for it. And we are going to, God willing, continue learning our Torah. And one more reminder, on Wednesday, please join us for the giving of the Ten Commandments as we read it in the Torah, as we discuss God's revealing himself at Mount Sinai. Now we can come with full belief, full recognition, logic to understand that it happened. And looking forward to experiencing it with all of you guys. Wishing you a very big Chag Sameach. May you accept the Torah, the Simcha, the Pnimius, like the Rebbe would always tell people. Should be a joyous holiday. Should be something that you take seriously, you internalize, and we should experience, hopefully, the revelation of God Himself once again. The revelation of Mashiach may be right now. Amen.
Amen.
We have everybody in the parking lot.